Hello and welcome to Star Wars Starship Versus, the series that takes two ships within the Star Wars universe, puts them head to head, and tries to predict which one would come out on top. Or at least that's what usually happens, because on some days, like today, I take ships from other universes, like for example Halo, and put them against your favorite ships from within Star Wars. Today is a very special day for a couple of reasons. The first is that we actually are doing a cross-universe matchup today, and it's one that's been requested a couple times and is kind of interesting. The second reason is because I finally got my new microphone, so hopefully you guys notice an increase in sound quality. And I do just want to say I never would have been able to afford this microphone without the help of everyone who donated on my GoFundMe page. I am still taking donations, but I do feel like I've met my goal and that I will be able to significantly improve the quality of my videos moving forward. So again, thank you very much, and I'll do a formal update later this week. Alright, so as I mentioned, today we're looking at a cross-universe matchup, and it is kind of a strange one. We're taking the very famous Snowspeeder, introduced first of course in The Empire Strikes Back, and putting it against the Banshee from Halo. And specifically, we're just going to look at a standard non-modified Snowspeeder and a Type 26A Banshee. That's the kind you see mostly in Halo 2 and Halo 1. So as always, we're going to evaluate these ships in three different categories: offensive systems, defensive capabilities, and also intangibles. However, keep in mind that this is not a race to see who can win more categories. We're trying to discover which ship is better overall. Also, despite the fact that this is a battle of the Rebel Alliance and the Covenant, and that the levels of training and piloting skill would have been different for the two factions, we're going to assume that these two craft are piloted by equally skilled persons. Alright, so let's start with the category of weaponry, and we'll look first at the Rebel Alliance's Snowspeeder. The Snowspeeder, or as it was more formally known, the Type T-47 Airspeeder, was actually the militarized version of an industrial cargo handler. However, even the militarized version was not really very well armed, and the ship's main weapon was really just a set of medium-powered laser cannons. The ship also had a rear-facing gun, which could be used to fire either harpoons or light lasers. Because the harpoon version is much more famous, and that was the type used at the Battle of Hoth, we're going to go with the harpoon rear-facing cannon. Unfortunately for the Snowspeeder, and as the Rebel Alliance discovered at Hoth, these weapons aren't particularly powerful, especially when used against armored or heavy targets. And at Hoth, the main weapons of the Snowspeeder were essentially useless against the very large AT-ATs. The Type 26 Banshee was an altogether different vehicle, and its weaponry was also very different than that of the Snowspeeder. Its main weapons were two medium-powered Covenant plasma cannons, and these are the kind of weapons that you see on most Covenant vehicles or turrets. These guns were fairly powerful and could fire very quickly. Their only real drawback is that they didn't work at long range very effectively. The Banshee also had a second weapon, a fuel rod cannon, and this could be used to attack fortified ground units or even heavy vehicles. Although this isn't always represented by gameplay, the Banshee is actually a very well-armed vehicle and can be used effectively against a variety of targets. I think the only major drawback is the one I kind of mentioned earlier, and that's a lack of range in the main guns. The fuel rod cannon also kind of suffers from this difficulty, and the weapon is not very useful at any real distance. Unless we want to get into a real debate about the power of Star Wars weapons versus the power of Halo weapons, which, trust me, I don't, I think it's pretty clear that the Banshee is the more well-armed vehicle. I mean, its main weapon seems to be more powerful than the main weapon of the Snowspeeder, and it's got that secondary fuel rod cannon, which could inflict serious damage even on heavy targets. Alright, so now we have defensive capabilities, and we'll look first this time at the Banshee. The Banshee is kind of interesting in my mind because I feel like it has been inconsistently represented through various Halo games. The main inconsistency, or at least area of confusion in my mind, is whether the craft actually has a shield. I mean, when you shoot at the ship, there's no sort of flicker that you would expect when you shoot at a shield, and when you pilot the ship, there is no shield gauge. It's just the standard player health. However, in Halo 2 Anniversary, the game which released a couple of years ago, the remake of Halo 2, in the level The Arbiter, there's a cutscene where you very clearly see that a Banshee has a shield. And this is because multiple projectiles actually hit the craft, and there's like a flicker, and it's very obviously meant to represent a shield. However, these are obviously not typical Banshees. They're used by the Heretics, kind of like a faction of the Covenant. So arguably they could be different, and they're actually Type 26 AZ Banshees, so again a different designation. However, the only official difference between these variants and a standard Banshee is the paint scheme. and another small aesthetic difference, no actual addition of a shield, which would be quite major. So I'm not really sure what to do, but because the cutscene actually shows them to have a shield, I think I have to give the Banshee at least a light shield, which is more than we can say about the Snowspeeder. That ship was completely unshielded, which is arguably pretty rare for a Rebel Alliance ship, and the Rebellion did try to make up for it by attaching extra armor, but I'm not really sure how effective this was, and we see during the Battle of Hoth that basically if you get shot by even the medium laser cannons of the AT-AT, you're in serious trouble. You're either losing a pilot or your ship is going down completely. To be completely fair, I mean, I'm not sure if even a Banshee could survive a shot from an AT-AT, but because it at least has some form of shielding, I feel like I have to give it the defensive capabilities section. Alright, so now we have intangibles, and when dealing with starfighters or other small craft, there's always one very clear intangible which often plays a pretty big role in the battle, and that's speed and maneuverability. However, unfortunately, the question of which craft is actually faster is not one that's easy to answer. On one side, we've got those kind of bullshit Star Wars Legends numbers, which say that the Snowspeeder could fight effectively at 400 kilometers per hour. However, we see nothing comparable to that speed in the movies or really in any other literature. And in the movies, the Snowspeeders do move very quickly, but again, not at 400 kilometers per hour. Looking at the Banshee, we also have some difficulties. In games, the Banshees are actually quite slow, but I mean, that comes down to gameplay mechanics and what you can actually make fun to play. However, in other media, and in particularly the Halo Landfall short film, Banshees are portrayed as being very, very speedy, kind of like jets almost. However, the only real resource which tries to give an actual speed to the Banshee is the Halo Encyclopedia, which puts its max speed at about 100 kilometers per hour. Not very fast for an airborne vehicle. So now we have to reconcile Halo gameplay and then two secondary sources, and we can take the Banshee as being either quite slow, as the gameplay would suggest, or very fast, as the Halo Landfall film would suggest, or perhaps right in the middle, as the authoritative Halo Encyclopedia would suggest. And I think we'll go with the Encyclopedia and put the max speed at 100 kilometers per hour, and I think that that is noticeably slower than the Snowspeeder. Although I'm not going to give the Snowspeeder a max speed of 400 to 600 kilometers per hour, let's say about 250. We also have maneuverability, and these two ships are maneuverable in different ways. The Banshee, of course, can hover in place and do tricks like loop-de-loops and barrel rolls, while the Snowspeeder is known for being able to turn very quickly, particularly when using its flaps. So keeping all of that in mind, let's now look at the actual battle, and again, I think that this one is very, very interesting. We have on one side the Banshee, which seems to be much more conventionally well-armed and is shielded. However, that is going up against the Snowspeeder, a ship which is very fast and very maneuverable. When the two meet up on the surface of some planet, which one would come out on top? Well, I do think the Banshee is an exceptional weapon of war. I think it's got one serious problem, especially when fighting ships in the Star Wars universe. That problem is a lack of range. The Banshee is really most effective when it can get up close to an enemy and pound it with its weapons. And really, in my mind, the ship is more effective against small ground targets or even light vehicles than it is other air vehicles. And I mean, I think both the design of the ship and how it plays in the Halo games kind of reflect that. So the Banshee is going to have a very hard time destroying such a fast-moving, maneuverable craft like a Snowspeeder. The Speeder, on the other hand, despite not having as powerful or numerous weapons or having a shield, can fight at a far effective range. And in my mind, it's more well suited for fighting other aircraft. I think the strategy of the Snowspeeder here is going to be to get as far away from the Banshee as possible, to turn around quickly and sharply using its flaps, and then to fire at a very far range at the Covenant ship. And I think the Snowspeeder can actually use its speed to get so far away that while it's able to hit the other ship, the Banshee won't be able to return fire because its plasma weaponry will lose its efficientness and its effectiveness. And really, in my mind, even the heavy weaponry of the Banshee and its dedicated shield, which it actually may or may not have, will not be enough to save it here. And I'm not saying that the Snowspeeder is a better vehicle, because the Banshee certainly has its niche which it can perform very successfully in, but when it comes to fighting other aircraft or other starfighters, it loses out in my mind to the Snowspeeder. So if it wasn't clear by now, I am going to give this battle to the T-27 Airspeeder, which I've been referring to throughout as the Snowspeeder, and I don't really think it's going to be that close. As I've been saying, one ship is just really not meant to fight off other craft effectively. effectively. So I'll give it to the Snowspeeder, and I say it wins probably 7 times out of 10. Perhaps I'm not giving the plasma weaponry of the Banshee enough credit, but that's just my opinion, and I know because I'm deciding this one on an intangible that this is probably going to be a controversial pick. So I would love to hear from you guys down in the description. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Did I miss something important? Am I kind of mischaracterizing the weapons of the Banshee? Let me know all that and more down below. Also, I'm going to put a poll in the upper right hand corner which you can vote on right now, and I'll reveal the results of that at the end of next video. If you haven't already, make sure to let me know which matchup you'd like to see in the comments, and if you see a matchup that you like, make sure to give it a thumbs up and a supporting comment. Besides that, thank you to everyone who watched, and of course, thank you for continually supporting me and for sharing this video, for liking this video, and for subscribing. I really appreciate all of it. Anyways, thank you very much, guys. May the Force be with you.